Hi again, everyone. We're back again with another insightful session for all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all those who joined us from across the world. And I welcome you to today's session on the 2026 Finance Mandate, how CFOs or Chief Finance Officers can govern compliance data data to unlock strategic capital. Once again, thank you all for joining us. Over the past decade, finance teams have invested heavily in ERP, e-invoicing, and tax automation to ensure compliance. However, in 2026, the expectation from CFOs is shifting from risk mitigation to capital generation. The real challenge is now how to use compliance data to improve liquidity. Not just liquidity, in fact, forecasting and strategic decision making. In today's session, Sanjeevi sir will explore where this gap exists and what CFOs must rethink to turn regulatory data into a strategic asset. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for today's session, Sanjeevi C. Ramachandran, VP and Lead Analyst here at 𝐓𝐤𝐥𝐥 Group, who brings in deep expertise in enterprise transformation, governance, and execution-driven finance strategies. He will share practical insights on how finance leaders can move beyond compliance to build a more capital-efficient function in 2026. We encourage all of you to drop your questions or any queries that you may have throughout the session in the Q&A section below, and we'll address them for sure towards the end of the session. With that, I hand it over to Sanjeevi. Over to you.
Thank you, Anish, and hello everyone. So thank you for joining, and let me begin this session with a question that I've been asking CFOs across industries over the past year. So have the last 5-7 years of your finance transformation actually made you more agile with capital? Because if we look at what has been done, it's significant. So we have done cloud ERP migrations, e-invoicing implementations, tax automation platforms, compliance digitization across geographies. And all of this has delivered real value. Definitely, yes. Today, finance organizations are more accurate, more transparent, more audit-ready than ever before. But there is always a paradox, and here is that paradox. Despite all of this, many finance teams still struggle with liquidity optimization, real-time decision-making, and capital deployment, which actually means we have built systems that are excellent at knowing what happened, but not necessarily deciding what to do next. So in fact, many CFOs today can generate a perfect financial report in seconds, but will still need 3 alignment calls, 2 validations, 3 discussions, and 1 let's revisit this tomorrow before acting on it. So today's session is about this gap. How do we move from compliance safety to strategic capital execution? Because in 2026, CFOs will not be measured by, did you avoid fines? No, but they will only be measured by how efficiently did you deploy capital. So now moving into the next slide, let's look at the agenda. Let me walk you through how we will approach this conversation. So this is not going to be a technology pitch, I can assure you that, and it's going to be a finance reality discussion. We will start with what finance has achieved and why that success has created a brand new problem. Then we'll go deeper into what exactly value is leaking inside finance means. Okay, because interestingly, the problem is not outside finance. It is within the flow of finance itself. We will then shift to what needs to change structurally based on the understanding, data, the number of years of experience we have gained personally, as well as 𝐓𝐤𝐥 Group as an organization over the last more than a decade, working with multiple vendors, the end user ecosystem, and all of that. We will be able to clearly articulate in terms of what needs to change structurally and what a future-ready financial architecture looks like. And finally, let's get to what you can actually do in the next 90 days. No, there is not going to be a 3-year roadmap, no transformation theatrics or drama from my end. It would only be just things that would not require 12, 15, 20 steering committees to approve. So now let's moving into the next slide. Let's talk about the fortress of data. So let's start with what I call again the fortress of data. So over the past decade, every compliance initiative has had it, validation layers, approval workflows, audit checkpoints, control mechanisms. And again, all of this was necessary, perfectly necessary, because finance had to move from a fragmented, error-prone manual environment to structured, controlled, and compliance systems. So all of this was necessary. Validation layers were necessary, approval workflows, audit checkpoints, control mechanisms were all necessary. But here is what has happened over time. We did not just build systems, we have built fortresses. Just think about it. Every piece of data today is validated, controlled, protected, and audited. But ask yourself this. So when we question ourselves on this front, how easily can the same data that we have built be used for decision making? And this is where the problem begins. Because what we have created is a system where data is extremely secure, but capital is extremely slow. For example, I mean, on a lighter note, in many organizations, finance data is probably the safest asset in the company because no one can actually move it quick enough to use it, right? So we built fortresses for compliance, but we did not build pipelines for capital. I mean, that's where we are lacking. So now getting into the compliance paradox, moving into the next slide. So the previous slide is what is leading us to what I call the compliance paradox, right? So the more we invest in compliance, the more rigid our operations will become. Because compliance systems are designed for correctness, traceability, and auditability. But what do the capital decisions require? Capital decisions require speed, flexibility, context, and timing. And these two things, right? The capital decisions and compliance systems, they do not align naturally. So let's talk about what happens. When the capital decisions and compliance systems do not align, what happens is finance becomes very good at ensuring nothing goes wrong, but slower at making something right happen. That's what happens. So we have essentially built a system where every transaction is validated, but every decision is delayed. And over time, or over a period of time, this creates a subtle shift. Finance moves from enabling a business to controlling a business. If we can add something sort of a punchline, compliance that has actually made finance safe, but not agile at all. We are only safe, we are not agile. And agility is something which is most required in finance. And moving to the next slide. Now let's look at the operational reality inside finance. This is where things get very interesting. In today's environment, tax clearance happens in seconds. E-invoicing happens near real time. Regulatory reporting increasingly automated. But we look at Treasury. Treasury is still operating with a delay of 10 to 14 days. Let's now think about that for a moment. So we have real-time compliance. We have near real-time transactions, but delayed capital visibility. So what this tells us is that effectively, finance is running at two different speeds. So if I can give you an analogy, it is like having a high-speed train connected to a very slow-moving carriage at the back. And the impact is not theoretical. This directly affects liquidity decisions, discount capture, borrowing costs, and most importantly, working capital efficiency. And I would like to add another important paradigm. This affects confidence in decision making. So now let's move into the next slide, which brings us to the most critical concept in this session, which is the 12-day black hole, right? So please allow me to break this step by step. Let's look at point A. Tax clearance. 1 second. What happens after that? Internal processing. And what does the internal processing include? It includes validations, approvals, reconciliations, and handoffs between teams, and this takes 10 to 14 days. Then finally, treasury gets visibility. So what happens in those 12 days? This is where value leaks. Let's quantify that. Early payment discounts are lost. Cash just sits idle with no yield. And treasury becomes defensive because of the higher cost of capital. And forecasts become inaccurate. Reactive decisions is the result. And the most dangerous part is this is normalized. The 10 to 14 days duration has been normalized. Most organizations do not even see this as a problem. They see it as a process. I hope I'm conveying the message. This is now becoming a process and this is becoming a new normal. People have accepted it. So compliance gave us visibility, but absolutely no velocity. So now let's get into the strategic pivot, which is the next slide, which is where the role of CFO is fundamentally changing. For years, finance has been structured around risk mitigation, control, and compliance. And rightly so, because the environment demanded it. But now the expectation is shifting. The question is now moved from, did you avoid risk to did you create value? This is a profound shift because it changes how finance is measured, how finance is structured, and how finance operates. Let me simplify this for you. Earlier, finance was a defensive function. Now, finance must become an offensive function. So that's what finance need to become, an offensive function. Earlier, finance validated decisions. Now, finance must drive decisions. Earlier, finance said, I'm saying this on a lighter note, earlier, finance used to say, let's double check this. Now, finance needs to say, let's move. We already know enough. That's the kind of confidence that needs to come in. And this requires a completely different mindset. From data custodians to data capital allocators. And the future CFO is not just protecting capital, but actively deploying it. So let's move into the next slide where we will talk a little more about the ERP reality, right? Because this is something very important. We must address this. And yes, I agree, this is also slightly uncomfortable. ERP systems was never optimized to, was never designed to optimize liquidity. No, not at all. That was not the purpose of an ERP system. ERP systems were designed for transaction recording, financial accuracy, and compliance reporting, which means ERP will be able to only answer what happened. It does not answer what should we do next, where should we deploy capital, what is the optimal liquidity position. So what happens in reality? Organizations end up building layers, spreadsheets, manual processes, offline analysis, and treasury adjustments, which also means the most advanced finance systems in the world still depend on Excel for decision making. And that's not a technology failure. It's an architecture gap. ERP is a system of record, but capital requires a system of intelligence. This is a very different level of getting things done, not through ERP, but through a system of intelligence. Moving into the next slide. The previous slide is actually leading us to governance. And this is where the real transformation must happen. Today, when I say governance in finance, or when we say governance in finance, we typically mean compliance checks, audit controls, approval hierarchies, right? In other words, we say that governance is equal to protection. LHS is equal to RHS, hence proved. But in 2026, it's not the case. Governance must mean something else. Governance must mean execution enablement. And okay, so let me explain execution enablement. Tax, AP, AR, and treasury operate in silos. Governance slows things down. But if they operate on a unified data model, governance accelerates decisions. So the question is the question is off. The question in terms of do we have control, the question is no longer valid. The question should ideally be, do we have aligned execution, right? So is tax, AP, AR, and treasury operating in an unified manner, right? Because too much governance without alignment is just a delay that has been well controlled. A delay, but well controlled. So future governance will not slow finance down. It will make it move faster, safely. So that brings us to the future, which is the target architecture. So what does the future actually look like? At a very simple level, it's a 3-layer model. So let's start with the ingest layer, which is where the complaints data enters the system. Let's take, for example, invoices, tax validations, and transaction records. Okay, these are all complaints data that enters the system through the ingest layer. Then comes the execution layer, where intelligence is applied. It can be AI, it can be rules, it can be decisioning engines, right? We have seen ingest layer and then execution layer. The third layer is the funding layer, where treasury acts, which is where liquidity allocation happens, capital deployment happens, working capital optimization happens, right? These are the 3 layers. And the key shift here is not technology. If you look at these 3 layers, it's the flow. Data does not stop, it moves. And when data moves, decisions accelerate. So in most organizations today, data travels faster than approvals, but slower than meetings. The goal is not automation. It is eliminating the waiting. So that is the goal. So that brings us to the next slide, where we are transforming or translating the target architecture into business impact. So let's translate the earlier slide into business impact, because ultimately this is what matters to CFOs. When this model works, the results are very tangible. We see 200 plus basis points improvement, 10 to 12-day reduction in cash cycle, significant working capital release. But beyond numbers, there is something more important. There is humongous increase in decision confidence. Finance moves from reactive to predictive. And when finance becomes predictive, suddenly everyone starts listening more carefully. This is not cost optimization. This is capital creation, right? This is capital creation. So let's bring this down to reality with the next slide, which actually talks about what can you actually do. So what is the action plan? Meanwhile, before we get into the slide, if there are any questions, you could raise the questions in the chat option that's available as part of this presentation, and would be happy to answer it. Anish, I would be happy to answer all the questions at the end of the.
In fact, Sanjeev, I just want to mention that we've already receiving a couple of questions regarding whatever you discussed so far. And I'm just listing it down. Once we are done with today's session, I'll have it asked to you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for that, Anish. So, coming back down to reality, what can we actually do? There are 3 immediate steps that we can take. One is align the silos. Tax, APAR, and treasury must operate on shared data. And then we identify the lag. Where exactly are we losing time in the process? Where is the time being lost? And let's work on redefining the KPIs. Let's measure velocity. Let's measure latency. Let's measure capital efficiency. Because finance does not optimize systems. It optimizes metrics. If your KPI is compliance, congratulations, you will be very compliant. But if your KPI is capital velocity, that is when the behavior changes, which is what is the need of the hour for businesses. So what you measure in finance becomes what you create. So let's move into the next slide, which is where I will leave you with very clear takeaways, 3 clear takeaways. 1, compliance is the foundation. It's not the outcome, right? And the second takeaway is the real gap is execution. It's not technology. And speed is the new advantage, not just accuracy. So a processing time of 10 to 14 days, right? We cannot, we would not be able to justify that accuracy is the parameter because of which the entire process got delayed. And it's not technology. It's not the outcome. It's actually compliance, execution, and speed, right? And most importantly, the opportunity is already in your system. You don't need more data. You do not need more tools. You do not need more complexity. All you need is fewer delays. Capital is not missing. It is waiting. And so we come to the end of the session. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sanjeevi. I mean, yeah. So, Sanjeev, I just want to mention that you saying capital is not missing, but
it is waiting.
That's it. Yeah, it's waiting. It's a very catchy line, and I'm sure all the finance leaders today are excited to listen to you on inputs.
So happy to
how from days it can lead to minutes.
So that's what we need to look at. So we connected to the earlier slide, right? Earlier we were thinking the delay is because of the outcome, right? Our technology is the gap,
right.
Or we were thinking accuracy is slowing us down. No, it is not that. Compliance is the foundation. I'm reiterating. The real gap is execution, and speed is the new advantage, right? So capital is not missing. It is waiting. So moving to the closure slide, I would like to thank all of you for your time today. If there is one thought I would leave you with, it is this. Finance is no longer just a control function. Yes, it was looked that way in the past. I mean, it was being considered that way in the past. But now finance is no longer just a control function. It is becoming the capital engine of the enterprise, And the difference between the two is not technology. It is how fast you can act on what you already know. And hopefully with fewer Excel sheets and fewer, just one more validation moments, we'll be able to move away from.
In fact, I think we should quote that. Yeah, I was just saying that, in fact, we may need to quote that sentence that you just mentioned. And before you say your thanks, we have a couple of questions from the audience, which they would need some insights from your end on the same. So maybe in today's session, you explained everything, which made sense conceptually. But in reality, they feel most of them are still, they're still dealing with legacy ERPs, or let's say fragmented treasury systems, or heavy compliance overhead. So how practical is the shift towards capital velocity without completely overhauling the existing financial stack? What is your take on that?
So Anish, this is a very, very important question, right? And I'll be very honest with you. This is one of the most common concerns we hear from CFOs. The key point here is this is not a rip and replace transformation. It is a flow optimization problem because most organizations already have ERP, compliance platforms, and treasury systems, right? The issue here is not the absence of systems. It is the absence of connection between decisions. So instead of asking, do I need a new system? The better question will be, where is my decision flow breaking? For example, where does data stop? Where does manual intervention begin? Where does time get lost? Fixing those points typically delivers faster ROI than replacing the entire stack. Again, on a lighter note, because if replacing ERP solved this problem, most CFOs would already be on their third transformation by now. Okay. So you don't need a new finance stack, Anish. You need a faster decision layer on top of what you already have. So that's what is required.
Well, thanks for answering that. I'm sure that has made the conceptual explanation to some reality point of view for our audience today. Now, one more thing that has come up from the audience is the fact that you spoke about capital velocity and reducing delays. But from a governance perspective, speed often increases a lot of risk. So how do you balance the faster decision making with compliance and control?
This is an excellent question. And this is where most of the organizations actually hesitate. Okay.
Yeah.
Because traditionally, speed and control were seen as trade-offs. If there is speed, control goes down. If I have better control, then we slow down. I mean, it was being seen as trade-offs. It is not the case. The way we are seeing it now is properly structured systems actually increases both speed as well as control. Let me explain. So when decisions are manual, fragmented, and dependent on interpretation, risk increases. But when decisions are rule-driven, data-aligned, and consistently executed, risk actually reduces.
Yeah.
Right. So the goal is not to move faster by removing controls. It is to move faster by embedding controls into execution. Right. Because let's be honest, Anish, most delays in finance are not because of risk. They are because of uncertainty. And when systems remove uncertainty, decisions naturally accelerate without increasing risk. The future is not about fast versus safe. It is fast because safe by design.
Another exciting quote from Sanjeev. I think audience they're having a wonderful time today with with the quotes or with the statements that has been coming out from your end. Well, I'll just take up one last question which has come up from the audience.
Sure.
And I think this is one of the most important question probably everybody in this field would want to know. Let's say if I had to start tomorrow, then what the first tangible step I should take to move towards the strategical capital model that you had explained in today's session?
So if I had to start tomorrow, what is the first tangible step? Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. The first step that I should be taking to achieve the strategic capital model that was mentioned in today's session. What should I be doing first? How should I start?
Fantastic. That's the right way to look at it, and not as a vision. We need to look at it as a starting point. Okay, the first step is
probably Sanjeev, you can mention a step-by-step process on how do I achieve that.
It's a set of steps. Yeah, it's a set of processes, I would say, because the moment you say it is vision, right? Again, we'll end up going nowhere. It stops, right? I mean, there is no extension to this vision, especially in this context. So we need to treat this as a starting point. So which means that the first step is actually very, very simple. Measure your delay, right? What is not measured cannot be rectified. Okay, so always measure your delay. Most organizations track what? Revenue, costs, compliance metrics. But you know what is missing? If you would like to take a guess, Anish?
Well, probably the execution aspect of it.
Fantastic. Decision latency. That's what they lack. Lack and track. Okay, so they track revenue because it's revenue. Cost, it's associated with revenue. Compliance metrics because it's connected to both. But then decision latency is one of the primary parameters to be tracked. So what I would recommend is map one end-to-end flow from tax validation to treasury action, for example, and ask questions. How long does it take? Where does it stop? Why does it stop? Because once you see that clearly, the improvement opportunities become obvious, right? Because in many cases, the biggest discovery is not a system gap. It's realizing how much time is spent waiting for those emails, right? So, and from there, what needs to be done is let's align the teams, let's redefine the KPIs, and start reducing that delay incrementally. Because transformation does not start with AI. It never starts with AI. It starts with identifying where time is being lost, right?
The bottlenecks.
It's the bottlenecks. Yes, it's the bottlenecks that's very critical to your business. And yes, I mean, it's KPIs are not compliance, right? It's about you measuring the right parameters, you aligning with the right strategies, you not trading off speed for control. Okay, is something that's gonna make CFOs really very successful because we are not a control function anymore.
Thank you for shedding your light there, Sanjeev. And I'm sure, I mean, in fact, this is the session today explained how we can move from, from days of processes to maybe minutes. And I feel probably organizations are just hesitating to take those risks, or like you clearly mentioned, identifying those areas that is taking is areas where organizations these days are finding some challenges. And thank you for sharing your, your insights there. To all our audience, like Sanjeev mentioned some time back, we encourage all your questions and feel free to drop us a mail anytime you have any queries regarding whatever we discussed today. We're happy to address all of that. And as we conclude today's session, I'd like to sincerely thank all of you for joining us and being a part of today's discussion. It's for you and it's for all of our audience that we are sparing our time in sharing the the insights that our experts have identified across the experience that they have shared in the market. And today's conversation clearly highlighted a critical shift in finance, let's say from moving from compliance to a requirement to compliance as a strategic advantage. Now, as CFOs look ahead in 2026, the ability to govern data effectively and translate into a liquidity or insight and capital efficiency will be the key differentiator, like Sanjeev just mentioned some time back. And once again, yeah.
Next time I'm going to be the moderator because I think you are doing a good job in terms of explaining financial.
Well, see, I believe the moment we attend your sessions, the people like us or the people like the audience, we become experts on the matter just by listening to listening to you. And with that, I would like to thank you, Sanjeevi, today for sharing your valuable insights and your practical perspectives on how finance leaders can unlock strategic capital from compliance data. And to all our attendees, thank you for your time and for your thoughtful questions. In fact, some of those questions really made the people who hesitated to ask questions also to understand better on how do they go about starting it. So once again, do stay updated to all our research, our insights, and all our upcoming webinars. Do follow us on LinkedIn with qksgroup.com. And we look forward to having you all in our upcoming sessions. We have more such insightful discussions coming from Sanjeevi and all the other thought leaders from QKS. Once again, thank you all for joining us and have a very great evening.
Thanks, Anish. Thanks, everyone.